Stories influence, teach, and inspire us. But what about the storytellers who create them? Uncorking a Story profiles storytellers to uncover how their background and life experiences influence the stories they create. We learn what motivates them, their path to success, and what fuels them to keep creating. It all starts by asking one simple question: where does your story begin? Welcome to Uncorking a Story. Now here's your host, Mike Carlin.
Hello and welcome to Uncorking a Story. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and today I'm excited to introduce you to Anastasia Zadeik. Anastasia is an author, editor, and narrative nonfiction storyteller. When she's not reading or writing, you'll find her practicing yoga, hiking, biking, swimming, lots of ing words in there, hanging out with her husband and her empty nest rescue dog, Charlie. I want to know about Charlie. She's here today to talk about Blurred Fates, which is her first novel. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, Anastasia.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, Anastasia, I'm happy to have you here. And I'm curious, where does your story as a writer begin?
So I would say my story as a writer kind of begins as a storyteller as opposed to a writer. And it begins back in Mount Prospect, Illinois. And it kind of loops back there. So bear with me. It's a bit of a full circle. When I was growing up, I had 4 brothers and sisters, and we often had foster children. So there was lots of kids around. And every night at dinner, whenever we at least had enough time to do it, we would be given each 3 minutes to tell the most important or interesting thing that happened to us that day. And so with 6 kids around the table, the 5 of us plus a foster kid, that was, about 20 minutes of storytelling. So it was quite a bit of storytelling every day. And we learned how to tell something in a concise way with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I was accused of being somewhat wordy. In fact, there's to this day, there was one particular story I was telling about a game we played in gym, and when I was in 5th grade with Mr. Schmidt, the gym teacher, and it involved a lot of logistics, running to this line when he blew the whistle this many times. And to this day, I'll start a story and my brothers and sisters will go, "Is this a red line, green line story?" Because I'm known for but I think the details are important. So I tend to kind of go a little long. I apologize in advance for that. And after I left home, I started, I journaled all the time, took some short story classes after and memoir classes, but just kind of on and off, and didn't really write anything that I shared beyond my classwork or my family. Until, this is the full circle part, I went back to the Mount Prospect area after my dad died, and I wrote and delivered his eulogy. And for me, it was like telling the story of my dad. So it was the first time that I'd ever told a story to an audience that I didn't know everyone. And it gave me, I was very nervous. My father was a minister, so I had big shoes to fill. But it went really well. And when I came home back to San Diego, I became involved in a narrative nonfiction storytelling organization that the whole goal of it is to help people tell their stories and tell them better. And so they assign you a writing coach and a performance coach, and you work with the other writers. And I began to do that quite a lot. I've done about 14 of them now. I've become really involved in the organization. I serve on the board. I'm a writing coach. I do performance coaching. And that kind of led me to believe that it was okay for me to put my work out into the world. And so I began also doing more writing and wrote this book and wrote another book, and then decided to go out and publish one of them. So that's where we are with Blurred Fates. So
Wow. It does come full circle. When you were kind of growing up, what did you want to be when you grew up? I mean, what was writing on the list of things that you were interested in, or what career aspirations did you have?
It wasn't. In fact, as an adult, I'm surprised at the number of things that I'm learning out that I could have done. Didn't even know there were certain careers out there, but I was pretty destined to be either a lawyer or a doctor, and stopped with the medical route because I fainted at the sight of blood and thought that was probably going to put a bit of a damper on that career. And focused on the lawyer part until I got to a tricky question on one of my law school applications, which was, why do you want to go to law school? And I called my brother, who was a lawyer, and I said, what do they want? And he said, honestly, they want to know why you want to be a lawyer.
Right.
I was like, I don't really have an answer. So I put that career aside and ended up working in neuropsych research. I was a psych major and ended up working in neuropsych research, primarily statistics, a lot of statistics, report writing, and then helped write some papers, like journal papers, nothing that was fiction, or even close to fiction. But so I've always been writing a bit here and there, but never thought that I would be a writer.
It's so interesting because I was a psych major, and I was fortunate enough to do a lot of undergraduate research, and prepare a paper for a publication. It never got published, likely because the research wasn't all that complete. But that was part of I was part of the process. Like, it wasn't the expectation that this thing would make it to a journal. But what I learned after I left, psychology was, it's a different kind of writing when you're writing for business, or when you're writing, doing creative writing. Like, you almost have to relearn how to write, because I think, in academia, like, more is more. But in the business world, and of course in writing fiction, it's like less is kind of more, which is what my editors always tell me anyway, when they chop 100,000 words down to 80.
Absolutely. And I think, journal writing there's a formula that you have to follow. And even down to the sentence level, there's certain expectations that people have when they're reading that type of writing. Creative writing is just a whole different ball of wax. But I have to say that the short story stuff, the narrative nonfiction, is all short. It's 5 to 6 pages. And it did teach me to be really careful with words I chose, because you have to be, you're trying to tell a whole story in 10 minutes. And with a novel, you get a lot more latitude.
Sure. So what was that transition like, going from, narrative, nonfiction, to writing a novel, going from 5 pages to, 285 pages? What was that like for you?
It's an interesting thing. I did not, when I first set out to write this book, I didn't really I'm a seat of the pants writer as opposed to a plotter. And so I kind of just sat down and started like fleshing out the characters, and had some ideas about what might happen to them, and did one of those what if scenarios, and then just played it out. And I almost treated each chapter in the first draft like a little story, which in some ways was good, because it read like a beginning, middle, end. The problem was that each chapter ended, and there wasn't a whole lot of incentive to turn the page, because it felt complete by itself. So in the second draft, I went to a writer's conference in between the first and the second draft of the story, and the keynote gave this advice that you should end each chapter with some type of incentive to turn the page. It doesn't have to be a cliffhanger, but there has to be something that makes them go, there's a question here, there's something unresolved here, I don't know what's going to happen next, I want to turn the page and find out. And so in the second writing, I had to take out some of the bows and not have everything kind of end with an end.
Yeah,
if that makes any sense.
Yeah, totally. So tell me, what's Blurred Fates about?
So Blurred Fates is fundamentally a story about a woman who is trapped by the things that she doesn't talk about. And there's an inciting incident in her life that puts her in this uncomfortable position, because if she believes that if she tells why this event triggers her so much, that if she gives her history to her husband, he won't want to be with her. But if she doesn't tell him, it's destroying her from the inside out. And so she's sort of trapped in this space of watching her life fall apart in an effort to not let her life fall apart. So that's basically what it's about. And it's about the interplay between nature and nurture, and how we're all the product not only of our own DNA and the environment we grew up in, but that we're also the product of those with whom we interact. Their nature and nurture interacts with ours, and it gets all blurry. So that's the title, Blurred Fates.
Oh, that's really
comes
cool.
from a poem towards the end of the book.
Oh,
So.
neat. Very neat. Yeah, no, I remember just talking psychology before, just the old nature nurture debates. I remember studying a lot of research on that back in my undergraduate days. Anyway, it's really, really fascinating stuff.
Yeah. So did you do anything to pursue the psych stuff after college?
I was set to get my PhD, and somebody told me, I was gonna go into the clinical field, and somebody told me, why don't you work for a year before you go back to school? You've been in school your entire life. The PhD in clinical is like 7 years.
Yeah.
It's almost twice your undergraduate. So I said, okay, I'll get a job. So I got a job working in advertising, and fell in love with working in advertising. I was in a group that did market research, where I was using all my statistical background from psychology to, not help people, with illnesses or anything, but I was helping brands do smarter things with advertising. And I saw my first focus group back in 1996, and I'm like, God, that looks like group therapy, but this guy's having a lot more fun and nobody's crying. So I said, I had this aha moment where that's what I wanted to do. So I became a focus group moderator, and had a great career with it. And still dabble in it to this day, as a way of paying the bills, so to speak. But,
so you clearly you're very interested in people and what they think.
Very interested in people and what they think. I think that's the thing that connects the two, the two parts of it. That's what drew me to psychology is. I'd like to know how people think, how the mind affects the body, how people make decisions they make. And now I'm doing it for much less altruistic reasons. But again, it pays the bills, and I didn't have to spend 7 to 8 years doing a graduate and a postdoc.
Well, in a way, yeah. I did a similar thing in the sense. Well, I worked in neuropsych, but I worked in the field of memory. We were studying memory disorders, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, frontotemporal dementia, that sort of thing. But we were also kind of looking at how memories are formed and how things are often misremembered and then stored in the misremembered way. And I kind of did my psych degree writing this book and the other book, which have psychological themes, and enabled me to kind of do that exploration about how people become who they are and why do they think the way they do, but through writing instead of through studying. So, yeah. So I think we're all just drawn back to whatever it is we're drawn to,
Yeah, I think we are, but I think there's a natural curiosity that comes with wanting to study in that specific field, but there's also a natural curiosity that writers have. It's like one of the superpowers I think that writers have is they're naturally curious individuals. Just thinking about how an everyday, just think about how many stories are based on an everyday encounter that somebody just followed to like the nth degree. To me, that's fascinating. To have the ability to see the world in maybe a slightly different way also is again a superpower for those of us who use the pen to sometimes make a living.
Absolutely. It's also great because everything that happens to you in life is material. So there's never like it teaches you a lesson, or like I can turn something, an encounter at a coffee shop, into a story.
Yeah.
I once turned a sign on a subway into a story because the sign was so interesting. It said, only happy people can sit here. And it was an ad for orange juice. And I remember thinking, was the person sitting there happy? And then I started noticing all the people in the subway and ended up writing a short story about the people on that car, in that car. And it's just like life it's always there. There's always stories all around you.
I think that's a great exercise to give people. I have to do a sort of a creative writing workshop later this summer into the fall. I can't even remember, with market researchers who want to get better at writing reports. And then one of the exercises I'm giving them is to leave the workshop to go do some kind of activity and then write a story about it when they get back, just to see what they notice, what they observe, how they could follow their own curiosity. And then to figure out how to do that with, data and, and observations from other types of research. So, so there
Cool.
you go. Tell me about the publishing process for this. What route did you go? Did you go the independent route? Did you find an agent? How did you, what was the journey like there?
So I wrote this book about 10 years ago, and I initially tried to go the traditional route, but I was very bad at the agent process. It kind of comes from, I grew up sort of as a people pleaser. And so I would write to an agent, and sometimes they would write me back and they'd say, can I have part of the manuscript, or a couple times the whole manuscript? And I would send it to them, and then I would wait until they wrote me back. And then I would write to the next one. But you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to send it out to, 80, 100 people at once, or in like phases. And it's supposed to be sort of a quick process. And I was dragging it out where, I was giving people 6 months before I even wrote them back to say, are you still interested? So it took me about 4 years until I kind of said, oh, I guess it's not working. And then somebody said to me, well, how many people have you written? I said, like 12. And they were like, well, you just started. And I was already just discouraged. So I put it away. I put it in a drawer, and I thought, first book belongs in a drawer. And then I went to a writer's conference on voice, finding your voice. And I was in a workshop, and the instructor was reading to us from poetry, and she read us some Mary Oliver, and she was talking about how you can identify her voice right away. And so she asked if people had anything with them, if they'd be willing to read it so that we could assess voice. And I read, I said I would read, and there was a couple people that read before me. And then, we talked about ways that they could, enhance the voice, et cetera, et cetera. And then I read the first few pages of this book, and there was dead silence in the room. And I thought, oh my God, thank God I put it in a drawer. And then somebody started clapping, and then everyone started clapping. And I was like, oh my gosh. And then somebody was like, well, where is it? When can we get it? And I was like, oh no, it lives in a drawer. It's never coming out. And so they all encouraged me in this class to pull it back out and figure out what was wrong with it and fix it. And so I did that. And I worked with a developmental editor that was formerly with one of the big 5 publishing companies. And she did a, close read and sent me back like 6 pages of notes. And I did all of those. And then I gave it out to beta readers. And then I did another revision. And so it's been in revision probably for the last 5 years. Yeah. Meanwhile, I wrote a second book, and then decided to go, rather than starting all over with the agent process, decided to go with a hybrid publisher that is all women. I'm a Smithy, so the all women thing lives strong in me. And
what was the name of the publisher?
It's She Writes Press.
Oh, sure. I know She Writes Press. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And so my project manager is a woman, the publisher's a woman, all my editors were women. And I'm not dissing men, trust me, but I like that. It feels really, I like the idea of women supporting women in business. And this was one way that I felt like I was doing that. And it seemed like a good fit. I get a little more control, and a lot of the expectations, even of the traditional publishers now, are that authors do a lot of their own marketing. So that part didn't really bother me, that I was going to have to do that.
Not just a lot of your own marketing. 90% of your own marketing. Yeah. It's wild.
So that's the part I'm in now. And that's a new world. But I'm learning a lot, and I'm a firm believer in always trying to learn, keeps me not young, but younger.
What did you learn about sort of going through this very long process for your first book that you can take to your second book?
I think that one of the biggest things I learned was to not be afraid to let go of parts of the book that aren't working, that I feel were important, but the only one who knows they're there is me.
Yeah.
And that's something that I actually learned from writing narrative nonfiction, because when I work with other writers, and when I have my coaches working with me, and they say, this part, for this story, you could put that in another story, but for this story, it's not adding enough to take up that space. And it would be more important for you to put in more about this, or how this impacted you. And at first there was this resistance, and then I would say, but I really like it. But I realized that no one knew it was not there. When I read the final story, no one knows what I took out. And so that was a really important lesson for me, to be less attached to what I've written, and to be able to hear from someone else, yeah, that's a nice sentence, but it really doesn't, it's not moving the story forward, and it's not planting a seed for something that's going to happen later. So you really don't need it. And so I think that I'm going to be better at the editing process, the self-editing process. And then I've also learned it's really, really critical to, even though I have a copy editing certificate, it's really important to turn it over to someone else.
Yeah.
You can't copy edit your own stuff.
No, not at all. Not at
impossible.
all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So those are my 2 lessons.
There you go. 2 lessons learned. Good lessons. Hard lessons you have to learn the hard way, I'd say.
I think so. For me, it was something I had to learn. People were telling me that the whole time. And it wasn't until I think when I sent it out to the first copy editor and I got it back, and I was like, wow, these are really good changes. I was like, of course they are.
Yeah. Have you ever been to the La Jolla Writers Conference out your way?
I have. That was the one that I was at, where I read the little portion, the La Jolla Writers Conference.
I don't know what it is about San Diego. I was supposed to go to that 4 or 5 years ago. So I hired Jared and Antoinette Kurritz, who run that conference, to
I know them.
Yeah, to do some PR for one of my books a few years ago. And I was going to come out to the conference, but something happened. I don't know. I mean, this well before COVID, but something happened. I couldn't go. And I regretted that, because I had, I think, 3 agents lined up who wanted to talk to me about my submissions. And there's so much of like finding an agent, I think, is going to those events and networking with people, so that you're not just going to wind up in the slush pile, which you still might anyway. But
yeah.
No, it's and then then COVID did happen, and they told me I could come at a later date, because I still paid the full amount. But we'll see if I ever make it back. But it seems like a great event.
Well, so I am involved. I'm the director of operations for the San Diego Writers Festival, which is here in San Diego. It started about 4 years ago, right before COVID. We had our first event was live, and then the last 2 have been all virtual. But this year we're going back live. So we should chat about that later. If you
sure.
Come and do something with us at the festival.
No, that'd be fun. I'd love that.
Yeah, we partner with Warwick's bookstore in La Jolla, and with the Coronado Public Library, which is where we have all of our live events.
Yeah, and I'm doing more live events like this. I should say doing more. I'm starting to do live events with this podcast, and I've been thinking about going to bookstores to do some of these events too. So would love to chat more about that. But,
yeah.
Before we talk more about me, we have to talk more about you. So I'm curious, these are some of the fun questions I ask everybody, but Anastasia, what were some of your favorite TV shows when you were a kid?
Oh gosh. Okay. So my favorite TV show, 2 favorite TV shows, were right after school. And I would come home. My mom was a teacher at our school, so we would all come home from school and we would have a snack, because we were growing kids, I guess. And our typical snack was a fluffer nutter sandwich, which is peanut butter and fluff on white bread. It is basically the most unhealthy thing.
That's great for your sugar levels.
Right. And we would watch Gilligan's Island and the Brady Bunch. And I saw every one of them multiple times, I'm sure. We memorized the theme songs. I can probably sing it.
Just sit right back and you'll hear a tale of a fateful ship. Yep.
And in fact, last Saturday, I was with my brother and sister-in-law, and we were doing a tour of a city we'd never been to on bikes. And the guy said, it's a 2-hour tour. And my brother and I both went, 3 hours. It's ingrained in your brain.
Gilligan's Island and the Brady Bunch are 2 shows. When I asked this question, very common shows that people mention. And I'm trying to think, like, what is it about these shows that just speak to people so well? Gilligan's Island, I think it's just the 6 different characters in a situation they can't get out of, which I still rack my brain around how they could not get off that island. If you could make a coconut, a radio out of a coconut, somebody can make a boat, but nevertheless.
And they had the professor. I mean, come on.
I know. Although he did have a bit of a drinking problem, but that was off screen. But it was a great cast of characters. Certainly not a diverse cast of characters, but it was just a funny show. And Brady Bunch too. It's like my wife, I call her a Brady Bunchologist. Like she knows every episode of the Brady Bunch. She can quote it like chapter and verse. Like people can you quote scripture. But
yeah. Well, it's sort of this wholesome storytelling about a family, and it was kind of edgy back then. It was a blended family. And it's funny because I was thinking about, when I was listening to your previous podcast, I was thinking about this question, and I thought about the fact that it actually shaped some of my storytelling in a way, some of those early experiences with half-hour shows where it's a whole story. Like nowadays, a lot of TV shows are series. And so it's like the whole season is telling a story. Back then, in a half an hour, you got all of it. And there was the beginning, the middle, the end, and there was always a moral. In the Brady Bunch, somebody learned something. And
don't play ball in the house.
Right. Or Carpe Diem. I remember the one about or Let the Buyer Beware, or whatever that one was about the car that Greg buys.
Right, he buys a lemon. But I think you're onto something with how they used to write sitcoms and TV shows back in the day, because you could pretty much watch an episode of the Brady Bunch or Gilligan's Island without having to have seen any other episode.
Yep.
Now it's like you're right, everything's a serial, or everything builds on each other. It almost is like storytelling is it's great. I mean, there's some great shows out there.
Oh yeah.
But it's not as easy as it was, I'd say.
Yeah, and it's also changed. I think it's made, like, the series has sort of supplanted movies in some ways, because you can go deeper into characters than you could in 2 hours, but it gives you that freedom of writing in little pieces like a sitcom, but it's part of this much grander story.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway. That's
how about this, musical artists? If we were to look into like your playlists, if you assuming you have playlists, or mixtapes, if you're my age, what musical artists would we find you listening to?
So you would probably be like, this person's either schizophrenic. It's very eclectic. I'm an equal opportunity listener. I'm horrible at naming bands. Like, my husband knows every band, and he'll say, well, and I'll say, who's this? And I'll be like, are you kidding? This is The Who. I'll be like, oh, okay. But I listen to, it depends what I'm doing. My activity determines my music. So we have a rowing machine in the garage. If I'm rowing, I listen to this really irritating music that's from TikTok, a TikTok thing. And the artist is Doja Cat. I had to look it up.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah. I know Doja Cat.
And I just listened to it on repeat because I know exactly how long the song is. So I know how many times I have to listen to it before I can get off the rower. But I don't listen to that when I'm walking. I listen to soundtracks from movies or musicals when I'm walking. When I am writing, I tend to listen to like classical music. I have a whole playlist called Soothing Music. And then I have a subset of that called Favorite Soothing Music. And it's only like 4 songs, and I can listen to them over and over. And they just sort of put me in they help my brain to get on a different wavelength from everything else. And it's sort of like a signal to my brain. Like, when you're listening to this, you let go about the outside world, and it's almost like a signal, I guess. Yeah.
What's you mentioned movie soundtracks. I can't let you go without asking what your favorite movie soundtrack is.
Okay, so currently I'm listening to 2. One is The Greatest Showman.
Oh, yeah. Hugh
love
Jackman.
that one.
Yeah.
And then I listen to Pride and Prejudice,
wow.
The most recent one, which has some beautiful piano music. I play the piano, so it inspires me. And so those are the 2 that I'm listening to right now. But I kind of go back and forth on that. I also love La La Land. the
It's great. I love La La Land
soundtrack from La
soundtrack.
La
I
Land.
love that soundtrack. Just
Isn't
that
it
opening
great?
number, just that opening number when they're in traffic.
Yes, you
And
cannot be in a bad mood.
the one where they're in their planetarium, it's more
I
of a
know.
classical piece. That blows me away every time I see it. I mean, just the score of that is just so damn beautiful.
It is. It is. And the song, like this, the first time I saw the movie, the song that she sings at the end about her grandmother, just to me as a writer, it spoke to me because it's about the creative people often seem odd to others, but it's the dreamers that change things.
The Dreamer,
And
that's such a beautiful, beautiful song.
isn't it gorgeous?
That's a beautiful song. I saw that movie twice in the theaters, and I rarely see movies in the theaters, period, anymore. But I mean, I was so compelled to see that movie a second time in the theater because it was such a beautiful story. You know, it doesn't have the happy ending that you think it might have, but
No.
just the music and the art to it. It's like old Hollywood to me. And
Yeah.
Hollywood when it was, you know, I don't want to say more innocent because I don't think it ever was, but it was just maybe more simple. I don't know. It's just I love that movie.
And I'm actually a fan of I'm a fan of not having a totally happy ending.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, to me, that ending was more realistic. I mean,
yeah, I agree. Because
and it also told me you can have a happy life in multiple ways.
That's right.
If I didn't have this life, chances are I'd be happy in a different life, but it wouldn't be, obviously I wouldn't want to change this one because I have the people I have in my life. But
yeah, but the beauty of it is they give you the glimpse of what their life could have been like, and then they just take it away from you.
Wasn't it? I know it was,
which
and it was shot in this like
they broke a rule. They broke a rule, and I love people who break rules.
Yeah.
To me, it was a great movie. I'll stand up for it to the day I die. So how do you feel when you're looking at a blank piece of paper?
That depends. If I'm on a deadline, it's a little scary, but if it's just a piece of paper or a blank screen that I get to play with, I would say that the thing I'm feeling the most is curiosity, as where is this going to go? Because I'm often surprised by what I write. I start out thinking I'm going to write about something, and if I really let myself go, it's almost like I tell myself what it is I need to be writing about that day. Sometimes it doesn't turn into anything, but sometimes it does. And it's like, oh, if you had asked me the day before, would you have written that? I would, no. I mean, it's like, it's in that moment that I'm able to go somewhere with my thoughts. And so I'm always a little curious, like, where's this gonna take me?
Yeah. Oh. How about this? Advice you would give an aspiring author. Someone comes up to you and says, you know, I want to do what you do. What would you tell them?
Again, it probably depends on the day. If I'm having a day, I'd say don't. No, I'm only kidding. No,
run away.
What's your other job choice? No, I would honestly, I think I would say that trust in yourself, for that very reason that I just talked about, again, in terms of the page in front of you, view it as an opportunity to let your voice out and to trust what you feel. You should trust your voice, trust your own writing process. So many people, I think, feel that they have to sit down and they have to write like this person, or they have to write this kind of project. And I think sometimes your writing leads you to what you should be doing. I mean, there are times when I don't have the energy to work on a book or a short story, and I just feel like today I'm just going to sit down and write a poem. It's just, that's what I feel like I need. And I've taken just a few poetry classes that have given me enough. I don't ever share poetry, but it's just gives me that outlet, that creative outlet. And sometimes then that informs the next thing that I need to do with a book or with a short story. Because I've let my mind kind of go in a different direction, with less expectations of writing this thing right now, which, as I said, on a deadline, I'm horrible. So yeah, that's what I would say, is let your voice come out however it's going to come out, and trust yourself.
Now think about that little girl sitting around the table who's got to pitch a story to the family about what happened that day in 4 or 5 minutes. And think about yourself at that age and imagine you could write a letter to that younger self. What kind of advice or what kind of reassurances would you give your younger self?
Oh man. Okay. That little girl sitting around the table. I would tell her that, your stories are good. Like they're okay, even though your family is telling you to stop. No, I'm not kidding. That it's, and it's actually, it's kind of funny because I think that was my first exposure to constructive criticism. I am so lucky in that my 4 brothers and sisters are some of my best friends to this day. And I think that part of it was that we did that even though there was the age difference between my youngest and oldest brother was 7 years. And that's a pretty big age difference when you're 3 and 10 or 5 and 12 or whatever. But we all were interested in each other's lives because we did that exercise. And so I would say to my younger self, like, yeah, you don't have to tell the perfect story. You can tell a story and it can be a crummy first draft. And that's okay. And not everyone's going to like every story you tell. You're going to find your readers or your listeners and they're out there. So that's what I would tell her.
When you were around the table and you couldn't think of anything that happened that day, I mean, was it within the rules that you could just make up a story out of thin air or no? Like, could you get creative with the stories?
I never did that. I was such a good girl. I never did that. But I guess you could have. We could have. Nobody would have known. Maybe they did. Maybe my brothers and sisters did. I'm gonna have to ask them next time I see them. Did you all make up stories?
All right. Did you really fly in a helicopter on the way home from school today? Because I'm thinking about it more now and it doesn't seem like it makes much sense. I
think there were definitely elaborations. I think that people took some liberty with details. As my grandfather was a famous storyteller and he spun all kinds of yarns that we later found out were totally not true. We all believed that he jumped off of a ship in a swan dive with his shoes tied to his head and a Bowie knife in his teeth. And I believed that until I was an adult. And I said something to my dad about it. And he was like, well, that was a story. And I was like, what? And I called all my brothers and sisters. And I was like, all of us believed this story that my grandfather told us.
Oh my gosh.
He also told us that he was born on the 4th of July because he was an immigrant from Latvia and he wasn't, but he felt like his life started over when he came here. So he took the 4th of July as his birthday. And I just remember thinking that he always had the best birthday celebrations and how lucky was he, right? But it turned out that it was all manipulated. So I think we all got a little bit of that elaboration like technique from our grandfather. So I would not be surprised if there was some fiction being created at that dinner table.
Certainly. So are those hydrangeas behind you over your left shoulder there?
They are.
Nice.
They're from my yard.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're not out. They're not out where I am yet, but they come out later in the summer for us.
Yeah, we have a fairly consistent growing season here in that there's different plants for different times of year, but early May till well into the summer, the hydrangeas will keep going. And you can clip them back and they'll come back a second time here in San Diego. So
that's great.
We're really lucky. Great. Yeah, really lucky.
Well, very good, Anastasia. If there are people out there who want to know more about you, do you have a website or social media you want to share?
I do. My website is anastasiazadeik.com, which I wish it was a different, easier name to remember, but that's what it is. And you can find me on Instagram and Facebook and Goodreads and Twitter, though I don't really tweet, at Anastasia Zadeik.
There you go.
All one word.
And we will put all of that in the show notes for you listeners who can't write it all down quickly enough. You could just go to the show notes and all the links will be there. So,
and since there might be a visual of this,
of course,
YouTube, this is the book.
There it is, Blurred Fates.
Blurred Fates, and there's the name, which is impossible to spell.
Well, it was very fun talking to you, Anastasia, and
great talking to you too.
I wish you all the best with the book.
Thank you so much. It was really nice chatting with you too.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlin uncork a new story.